We're going to continue our discussion on function notation, specifically looking at how function notation relates to a graph. So I'm going to show you an example where we have a graph that's given to us, and then we're being asked a series of questions. All right, so the first thing that we want to keep in mind as we start looking at this is that our function notation is f of x. So you want to remember that anything inside the parentheses is always going to be the x. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to look at my first problem, which says find f of 0. So when I look at f of 0 and compare it to f of x, we can see that the x is equal to 0. So I know on this first one that the x is equal to 0. So they're not asking me for the x value because they're giving me that. What they want to know is what the y value is that goes with it. All right, so I'm going to look at my graph and I'm going to try to find a point that has an x value of 0 and a y value of some other number. So if I go to, on my x-axis, which goes across, if I go to x is equal to 0, I'm going to be sitting at the origin. And then what I want to do is either go up or down until I hit the graph. And if I go up, I can see that I'm looking at this point 0, 3. Okay, so that point has an x value of 0 and a y value of 3. Now, you want to be careful here because a lot of times students will take a problem like this and for the answer, they'll write down this. And that's incorrect. That's not what the problem is asking us for. The answer to the problem is just simply going to be 3. Okay, again, they told me initially that the x was 0. They're asking me what is the y that goes with it. The y that goes with it is 3. So not only do you need to be able to find the appropriate point, but you need to be able to express your answer in the correct manner. All right, so let's move on to the second one. So the second one says find f of negative 6. So again, what we know is that whatever's in the parentheses is the x. So we know that x is equal to negative 6. So on my graph, on the x-axis, I'm going to go to negative 6, which is right here. And I'm either going to go up until I hit the graph, or I'm going to go down until I hit the graph. And so when I go down, I actually meet the graph right here at this point, negative 6, negative 3. And so the answer is going to be, and again, they're telling me that x is negative 6, so I don't need that part. I need the y part. So the y part is going to be negative 3. All right, so let's look at the next one. The next one says, is f of 2 positive or negative? So what are they telling me? They are telling me that the x value is 2. That's what's inside the parenthesis. So again, on my x-axis, I'm going to go until I find the 2, which is right here. And I'm either going to go down or I'm going to go up until I hit the graph. All right, and I can see that when I hit the graph, I'm intersecting right here at that point, 2, 4. And so f of 2 is actually equal to 4. Again, we know that x is 2. They told me that. They're asking for the y. And so we know that the y value that goes with that is 4. So is that positive or negative? We would say that that is positive. The 4 is positive. All right, so our next one asks me for what numbers is f of x equal to 0. Now, remember that when we initially started talking about function notation, we made a point of saying that f of x was the same thing as y. So what they're asking here is for what numbers is y equal to 0. So I need to find numbers that have y values of 0. Well, those numbers where the y value is equal to 0, those are my x-intercepts. So that's here, here, and here. Now, it's not actually asking for the x-intercepts, it's just saying for what numbers is y equal to 0. So that's going to be happening at x is equal to -3, at x is equal to 6, and x is equal to 10. All right, and I'm going to skip down to the next, I'm going to skip the domain question for just a second. The next question says, what are the x-intercepts? So since those are the same thing, I'm going to go ahead and just write those in. Remember, the x-intercepts are always written as points. So we have -3, 0, we have 6, 0, and we have 10, 0. All right, and then the very last question asks me, how often does the line y is equal to 2 intersect the graph? So I need to draw the line y equals 2. Well, remember, a line that has an equation with only a y variable is a horizontal line. So we're talking about a horizontal line that crosses at 2 on the y-axis. So we're looking at this line. And it's asking me, in how many places does it intersect the graph? And we can see that it hits the graph in 2 places. All right, so the only thing that we have left is the domain question. So let's go back to that for a second. Remember that your domain is your set of x values. And remember that your x-axis runs left to right. So your domain is going to run left to right. So essentially, the domain is how far to the left does the graph go, and how far to the right does the graph go. Now, a lot of times students will look at a graph like this, and when asked for the domain, they'll come in and they'll actually list out the x values in the points that are noted on the graph. But what you want to realize is that there are points all along this graph. They didn't actually list those points out for me, but those points still exist. So you can't simply list out the ones that they happen to show, because you'll miss lots of those x values. So a better way to do it is to do it as an interval. So when I look at this, my leftmost x value, how far to the left does the graph go? This is the farthest left point that I have, and it has an x value of -6. And then how far to the right does the graph go? Well, this is my rightmost point, and it has an x value of 11. So my domain is going to be everything in between -6 and 11. Because these points are included, -6, -3 is a point on the graph, 11, 1 is a point on the graph, then I'm going to do brackets and not parentheses for my domain. Okay? Or you could just as easily have written it using an inequality. You could write it this way. But again, you want to be sure that you include the -6 and the 11 as part of the domain.